So I watched this video here by Mr. Robert Breaker about tithing, and unfortunately there are several very serious problems. He begins by making the claim that most people who preach about this are wrong and that he is going to teach it the correct way. And to be fair, let's hear it from him in his own words.
So there's so many things to tithing, and so many preachers preach it, and I hate to say it, wrong today. So what I want to do is take this doctrine or this teaching of tithing from the Bible and preach it correctly. Most preachers that preach on tithing, either they don't read the Bible or they don't think about what they're saying.
So according to him, almost everybody is wrong, and most people do not read the Bible or even think about what they are saying, and he promises that he will give us the correct teaching from the Bible and the Bible only. Now remember this claim, because we'll come back to this in just a few minutes. The first problem to notice is that he repeatedly makes the claim that tithing for God's people began under the Mosaic Law. Here are just a few examples.
You say, but I thought tithing was from God in the Bible. Well, we're going to see through this study that tithing is in the law of Moses, and it's a 10%. So tithing, according to the Bible, was a commandment under the law of Moses. Let me go ahead and write that up there, of Moses.
That the 10% tithe did not originate with the Levites is clear from the story of Abraham, and that is why whenever people try to refute anything in favor of tithing, one of the most, if not the most important target to attack is Abraham, because Abraham is defined in Scripture as a prophet and as a friend of God, and people who argue against tithing try to attack or dismiss Abraham because Abraham lived before Moses, before Sinai, before the Jews. He lived hundreds of years before the Levitical priesthood, and since we Christians also live outside of that priesthood, then the story of Abraham's tithe becomes very important. When people reject tithing as a minimum for giving, it is very interesting to see what they try to do in order to dismiss or downplay Abraham. A lot of people today, they just ignore this story and try not to give Abraham any attention, but Robert Breaker at about 29 minutes gets into the story, and he makes the claim that because Abraham's increase was, quote, won from a war and not, quote, earned like other occupations, then therefore this cannot be a legitimate religious tithe. Let's listen.
Today they preach you have to do 10% to God of everything you earn. But they say it's of what you earn. Well, old Abraham didn't earn this. He won it in battle.
Now there are several serious problems here, the first being that the dictionary defines earning as receiving, quote, as return for effort and especially for work done, and to win as to get possession of by what? By effort or fortune. In fact, so close are these definitions that, as you can see for yourself right here, the dictionary defines earning as a definition for winning. So by definition, when you win something, you have earned something, especially when it involves effort, and as far as we know, going to fight in a violent battle is extremely dangerous. Abraham and his men actually had to put forth serious effort in war. One wrong move and people are going to die. The problem here is that not only is Robert Breaker, he's not giving us clear definitions, but he does not give any biblical references that make any of these distinctions between, quote, earning and winning. And unfortunately, the problem only gets worse because this same story of Abraham is retold again in the New Testament in the book of Hebrews chapter 7, and the author of Hebrews, under the inspiration of God, uses the story of Abraham's tithe to prove the superior priesthood of Melchizedek. The problem is that the author of Hebrews makes no distinction whatsoever between Abraham's tithe and the Levitical tithe. Robert Breaker tries to make it appear as though their tithes are entirely different, but the author in the Bible does the opposite and makes no such distinctions. Both are 10% and both are given to the priest. Furthermore, another big problem is that the Bible author specifically says right here in verse 9 that Levi paid tithes through Abraham to Melchizedek. If, as Robert Breaker claims, that tithe is only confined to the Levites, then this would be impossible, because how? How could the Levites pay tithe through Abraham if tithe is confined only to the Levites? Furthermore, how can the Levites pay tithe through Abraham if the spoils of war cannot be tithed? Robert Breaker has serious problems. He is trying to claim that these are as different as apples and oranges, that the tithe of Abraham is somehow entirely different than the tithe to the Levites. But the author of Hebrews not only does not make this distinction, but contrary to Mr. Robert, insists that Levi paid tithes through Abraham. If what Robert Breaker claims is true, then the author of Hebrews is making a serious error. So we are forced to choose between this man here and the Bible. Either Mr. Robert is more inspired than the text, or all of Scripture is in fact given by God and is profitable for instruction. Another big problem is that one of the major arguments in favor of tithing is that if Abraham gave tithe to Melchizedek and Jesus is now a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, then why? Why cannot Christ receive tithes? Melchizedek received tithes, and Christ is a priest of the exact same order and ought to receive tithes. This is one of the most common fundamental arguments for tithing, and strangely, notice this, Mr. Robert just completely ignores this. Remember that Robert Breaker said that people who teach on tithing are wrong, but he doesn't even explain what's wrong with one of the most common arguments. Another serious problem is that Mr. Robert attacks a straw man. Now, for those that do not know, a straw man is when you misrepresent someone's position by creating a false argument and then attacking the false argument. Now, watch this video and listen carefully right here. After talking about Abraham and the spoils of war, he then says this.
These are spoils of war. So is it okay for us as Christians to go out and shoot people and kill people and take what they have and then give the church 10%? 1,000 times no!
The topic of tithing is very interesting to me, and I spend a fair amount of time reading books and journals, articles, and watching videos and messages about tithing, and I have never heard anyone argue that we can go intentionally kill people to make a profit, nor would it be fair to characterize Abraham's battle as taking place because of any kind of intent to acquire property. This is both absurd and it is unfair. You can see for yourself right here. The text says that Abraham only got involved after he heard that his brother's son was taken captive. So this exaggeration by Mr. Robert is not warranted, and this is not the only time that he does this. He does this repeatedly. When talking about earning and winning, he says this.
So does that mean it's okay to go out and win stuff, and whatever you win, you have to tithe? Let's see, I want to go on Price is Right, and I go on Price is Right, and I win $20 million. Oh, I have to give 10% of what I won?
Again, that is another false straw man. Nobody is arguing that Christians should go out and engage in games of chance. And notice carefully that his use of exaggerations do not respond to the actual argument. He's not responding at all to the actual text of Scripture. And the irony is that he immediately follows this statement with the accusation that those who preach about tithing don't read or think.
Oh, I have to give 10% of what I won? You see, most preachers that preach on tithing, either they don't read the Bible or they don't think about what they're saying.
So did you see that? He misrepresents arguments for tithing and exaggerates with examples which make no sense, but then he himself turns around and accuses others of not reading or thinking. He accuses others of being wrong. He refuses to explain why. He will not explain why they are wrong, and he then claims that he will teach from the Bible, but then he himself avoids the biblical texts that contradict his claims. Furthermore, in this next clip, watch as he makes serious blunders with very simple math. In Leviticus chapter 27, it says that if you wanted to redeem your tithe, you would have to add 1/5 in value. So For example, to illustrate, if you owed 100 bushels of apples as tithe and you wanted to keep those apples, you would add 1/5 and pay that value in money rather than as apples. To figure 1/5 is easy. You just multiply by 20% or 0.2. For example, 100 times 0.2 is 20. Add that and you get 120. Or just multiply by 1.2. It's very simple math. 100 bushels of apples times 1.2, you owe the value of 120 bushels. This is very simple math, but watch what he does right here.
So according to the Bible, tithing was under the Old Testament law. It was 10% of the things God blessed you with. But if you didn't want to bring those things, you could figure out the value of those things, add 20%, 1/5, and then take it to God. So if you're adding 20% to 10%, what do you get? 30%. So you got a 30% tax.
This is very simple math, but he errors and gets 30%. And the problem is that he then uses this to argue that tithe was not just 10, but was actually 30%.
So you got a 30% tax that you're taking to God. Now, I don't know. I'm not the smartest man in the world. But as I read the Bible, this is what I saw that a tithe is. So if you're just teaching 10% for giving, you're not teaching tithing. But if you're preaching this for today, then you've got a problem. You've got a big problem.
Again, did you see that? Because of this terrible math, he is the one with the problem, but then like elsewhere in the video, he turns around and accuses other people of having the problem. Again, he is accusing others of doing exactly what he himself is doing. In the United States of America, fractions and percentages are taught in elementary school to little children, so there is absolutely no excuse for this. Finally, there are many other errors in this video, but just one more. Because Robert Breaker has tried to attack and dismiss Abraham, he then makes the false claim that tithe is only under the Mosaic law. So throughout the video, we hear this repeatedly.
And not under the law. About something under the law and apply it to today. Put us back under the law. It's all about the law under the time of the law.
However, he has a problem and begins to trip over his own words because he then makes the claim that Christians should still give, but he is unable to explain why it would ever be okay for Christians to give less than those under the law. To whom much is given, much is required. If we Christians have so much more light, if we have so much more knowledge of God and the great plan of salvation through Christ, if we have the obligation to take this good news not just to Israel, but to the entire world, then why? Why would God require less of Christians today than that which was required of those under the law? And there is evidence in this video that Robert Breaker does in fact fully understand this. Many times when people argue against tithing, they will get tangled up in the contradictions of their own arguments. So in order to escape, one of the tactics that they use is to ask a question but give no answer and then just move on. And that is exactly what he does. Listen to this.
If the law demands something, and we're not under the law, we're under grace, shouldn't we give more because we love Jesus and because of what he's done for us? That's a good question. Genesis chapter 14.
Again, did you see that? If under the law the Jews gave a minimum 10% to support God's work, then how could it be acceptable for Christians to ever give less? Paul said that the love of God compels us. If we Christians are compelled by the love of Christ, then how can we ever give less than those who were compelled under the law? This is one of the most common arguments in favor of 10% as a beginning for giving, and although you heard him ask the question, he does not answer it. So this video here contains many false statements. He contradicts himself. He misrepresents biblical texts. He ignores very common arguments. He repeatedly exaggerates and also engages in several straw man fallacies. He makes serious errors with very simple math, and yet he has the audacity to turn around and publicly criticize and condemn other people as being wrong. So anyways, that's enough for this video. There are definitely plenty more errors that could be covered, but that's enough for today. Thank you for watching.